Can you imagine military trucks so tough they didn't just drive through war zones, they shaped them? Not sleek, not fast. Just brutally strong machines that looked more like tanks on wheels. What if I told you some of the rarest trucks ever? Built weren't meant to look impressive at all, yet today collectors would pay a fortune just to see one in person. These trucks carried guns, dragged tanks, crossed frozen wastelands, and survived conditions that would destroy modern vehicles. And the craziest part is that many of them were never supposed to last this long. They were built for war, not history. But they survived, and today they are rolling legends. Stick with me because the trucks on this list get stranger, bigger, and rarer as we go. And the final one is so extreme it once carried nuclear weapons across frozen rivers. Let's start with a truck that quietly earned legendary status long before anyone called it rare. The AEC Matador 4x4 was built in Britain in the late 1930s, right as Europe was sliding toward total war. At first glance, it didn't look special. Short cab, tall stance, flat windshield. But the moment it rolled onto muddy battlefields, everything changed. The Matador wasn't designed to race or impress. It was designed to pull heavy artillery, anti-aircraft guns, equipment that other trucks simply couldn't move. Under the hood was a 6-cylinder gasoline engine that made modest power by today's standards, but what mattered was torque. Deep, steady pulling force that didn't quit. You could hear it before you saw it, a low mechanical growl echoing across fields torn apart by shells. British crews trusted this truck with their lives, because when roads disappeared and mud swallowed wheels, the Matador kept moving. It served across North Africa, Western Europe, and the British Isles, towing some of the most important weapons of the war. After the war, many were stripped, modified, or turned into civilian work trucks. That's why finding a Matador today in true military condition is incredibly rare. And when one appears at auction, collectors fight for it, not because it's fast, but because it represents pure wartime reliability. But the next truck didn't become legendary where it was built. In fact, it earned its reputation thousands of miles away. The Studebaker US6 is one of the most important trucks of World War II, yet most Americans have never heard of it. Built between 1941 and 1945, this rugged 6x6 truck was shipped in massive numbers to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. And once it arrived, it became a hero. Soviet soldiers called it the American Camel, because it could travel long distances over brutal terrain without failing. Snow, ice, mud so deep it swallowed men. The US-6 didn't care. Its simple design, wide tires and dependable engine made it perfect for a land where roads were often nothing more than frozen paths. It hauled food, fuel, ammunition, and troops across landscapes that destroyed lesser vehicles. Some US-6 trucks stayed in service in remote parts of Siberia well into the 1970s. Today, most surviving examples are far from their birthplace, and finding one with original military parts is extremely difficult. That rarity, combined with its unique history, has made the Studebaker US-6 one of the most sought-after Allied trucks in the world. Now, if you've ever seen a classic military truck and thought, that's what war looks like on wheels, there's a good chance you were thinking of the GM W353, better known simply as the Jimmy. This truck wasn't just part of the war effort, it was the backbone of it. Built in staggering numbers during World War II, the Jimmy carried everything: troops, supplies, fuel, wounded soldiers, entire mobile workshops. It landed on beaches, crossed shattered bridges, and crawled through bombed-out cities. Soldiers joked that if the war had wheels, they would say GMC on the front. The Jimmy's 6x6 drivetrain gave it incredible traction, and its engine was tuned not for speed but for endurance. It wasn't glamorous, it rattled, it shook. It smelled of fuel and steel, but it worked. That's why troops trusted it. After the war, thousands were sold off cheap or converted for civilian use, which is why an all-original Jimmy in correct wartime configuration is far rarer today than people expect. When collectors find one with proper markings, original drivetrain, and documented service history, it's considered a treasure. But the next truck on this list wasn't about carrying supplies. It was about bringing giants home. The Scammell Pioneer was a British recovery and artillery tractor that looked like it belonged on a battlefield even when parked. Long hood, high cab, massive fenders. It didn't rush anywhere and it didn't need to. This truck was built to pull damaged tanks out of mud, shell craters, and chaos. Its diesel engine delivered slow, unstoppable power, and its gearing allowed drivers to inch forward under enormous loads. You didn't drive a Pioneer. You commanded it. Crews knew that when a tank was stuck beyond hope, the Pioneer was often the only thing that could save it. After the war, many were sent into civilian industries like logging and mining, where they worked until they were worn out. That's why surviving military-spec Pioneers today are exceptionally rare. When one shows up fully restored, it doesn't just attract collectors. It attracts historians. If that sounds impressive, the next truck takes everything you've heard so far and multiplies it. The Diamond T980 and 981 were American, heavy tractor trucks built to move the unmovable. Tanks. Massive artillery. Equipment weighing tens of tons. These machines were enormous, slow, and unstoppable. Their diesel engines sounded more like ships than trucks, deep and thunderous, echoing across supply routes. Speed didn't matter. Control did. These trucks hauled Sherman tanks across Europe and the Pacific, often under fire. After the war, many were dismantled or scavenged because maintaining them was expensive and complex. That's why today, a complete Diamond T in original condition is considered one of the crown jewels of military vehicle collecting. And this is just the beginning. Because the trucks coming next didn't just support wars. They defined entire eras of military engineering. And the next one on the list was so intimidating that even standing next to it made soldiers feel small. Asterisk, if you think the trucks so far were extreme. The next one feels less like a vehicle and more like a rolling fortress. The Mack nitrogen monoxide 7.5-ton 6x6 was built during World War II for one very specific purpose: to haul the heaviest artillery the United States could deploy. This was not a supply truck. This was not for troops or rations. This truck existed to move massive guns that could change the outcome of a battlefield. From the moment you saw it, you knew it was different. Tall hood, vertical grille, narrow cab that made the truck look even bigger than it already was. Underneath that long hood sat a huge 6-cylinder gasoline engine designed to produce massive torque at low speed. Speed didn't matter. Strength did. The Mack nitrogen monoxide crawled forward with unstoppable force, pulling artillery pieces that weighed more than most houses. It moved through mud, snow, and cratered ground while enemy fire echoed in the distance. Crews trusted it because when artillery needed to be repositioned fast, this truck never complained. After the war, most were scrapped or stripped for parts. That's why today, finding a Mack nitrogen monoxide with its original engine, drivetrain, and military body intact is incredibly rare. When one appears at auction, collectors know they're looking at one of the purest examples of brute force American military engineering ever built. But while the Mack nitrogen monoxide represented World War II muscle, the next truck came from a very different era, the Cold War, when engineers started pushing boundaries that seemed almost impossible. The Tatra 813 Kolos 8x8 was built in Czechoslovakia beginning in the late 1960s. And even today it looks unreal. Massive tires, high ground clearance, boxy cab that feels more like a bunker than a truck. But what truly set the Tatra apart was its engineering. Instead of a traditional frame, it used a central backbone chassis, a signature Tatra design that allowed the truck to flex and twist over extreme terrain without braking. Under the cab sat a massive air-cooled V12 diesel engine, producing enormous torque. And then there was the transmission, 20 gears. Not a typo. 10 gears with high and low ranges, giving the driver absolute control in any situation: mountains, snowfields, desert sand. The Tatra could handle it all. It wasn't just a truck. It was a mobile platform for missile systems, radar units, and heavy engineering equipment. Warsaw-packed armies relied on it to operate in environments where Western vehicles would fail. Today, restoring a Tatra 813 is a nightmare. Parts are scarce. Knowledge is disappearing. And that's exactly why collectors consider it a holy grail of Cold War military trucks. But if the Tatra was a fortress on wheels, the next truck was a battering ram. The KRAZ 255B 6x6 came from the Soviet Union, and everything about it screamed intimidation. Built starting in the mid-1960s, this truck was designed to survive abuse that would destroy most vehicles. Massive off-road tires, thick steel frame, simple, brutal engineering. Under the hood was a V8 diesel engine that roared loudly and constantly, often heard long before the truck came into view. Soviet troops trusted it because it didn't care about terrain. Mud, snow, rivers, broken roads, it pushed through everything. The KRAZ hauled heavy cargo, towed artillery, and served as the base for countless military systems across the Eastern Bloc. It wasn't refined. It wasn't comfortable, but it was nearly indestructible. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many KRAZ trucks were abandoned or stripped. That's why a fully original KRAZ 255B today is shockingly rare. When restored examples appear, collectors from across Europe compete fiercely to own a piece of that raw Soviet power dot, and then there's the truck that surprised even NATO engineers. The MAN KAT-1 8x8 was developed by Germany during the height of the Cold War, when speed, survivability, and versatility mattered more than ever. This truck was fast. Shockingly fast for something so massive. With its powerful diesel engine and advanced drivetrain, it could move heavy loads across rough terrain at speeds older trucks could only dream of. But speed wasn't the most impressive part. The KAT-1 featured advanced suspension, locking differentials on all axles, and a cab designed to protect crews from extreme conditions, including chemical and nuclear threats. It wasn't just a transport truck. It was a mobile military system. It carried missiles, radar units, and engineering equipment across Europe during tense Cold War standoffs. Very few were ever released into civilian hands, which makes finding a true military-spec KAT-1 today incredibly difficult. When one appears, it's instantly recognized as one of the most advanced military trucks ever built. But everything you've heard so far leads to one final machine. A truck so massive, so powerful, and so rare that even tanks seemed small next to it. This wasn't just a truck, it was a strategic weapon. And the story behind it sounds almost unreal. Before we get there, take a second and think about what you've already seen. These trucks weren't built for comfort. They weren't built for collectors. They were built to win wars, to survive conditions that destroyed everything else. And somehow, a few of them survived long enough to become legends. And now, you're about to meet the biggest and most extreme one of them all. The truck that carried nuclear missiles, dragged tanks across frozen rivers, and still haunts military vehicle history to this day. Asterisk, asterisk, if you've made it this far, you're already deep into the world of military machines that were never meant to impress civilians. But the next truck crosses a line between vehicle and myth. This is where military engineering stopped asking, should we, and started asking, can we? The Mack 537 8x8 is not just rare. It is colossal. First built in the late 1950s by the Minsk automobile plant, this truck was designed to move the most important and dangerous assets of the Soviet Union: tanks, ballistic missiles, mobile nuclear launch systems. When this truck rolled, it wasn't delivering supplies, it was moving strategy itself. Standing next to one makes everything else feel small. It stretches over 30 feet long, towers nearly 10 feet high, and weighs more than many armored vehicles even before it's loaded. And under its hood is something that feels almost absurd. A massive V12 diesel engine with aircraft-level displacement, producing power and torque on a scale few trucks have ever matched. When it started, the sound wasn't a roar. It was a deep, chest-rattling vibration that felt like the ground itself was waking up. The MAS 537 didn't rush. It didn't need to. It was built to pull over 50 tons across terrain where roads didn't exist, frozen rivers in Siberia, desert sand in Central Asia, muddy forests where even tracked vehicles struggled. Its advanced drivetrain allowed power to flow to all 8 wheels, and drivers could adjust tire pressure from inside the cab, a feature that was decades ahead of its time. Inside, the cab felt more like a command post than a truck. Heavy controls, thick glass, military-grade instruments. Crews knew that when they were driving a Mazda, they were handling one of the most important machines in the Soviet arsenal. During the Cold War, this truck was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It operated in secrecy, often hidden from public view, hauling weapons that were never meant to be seen. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a handful were released from service. Most were scrapped because maintaining them was expensive and complicated. That's why today, a fully restored Mars 537 is one of the rarest military vehicles on Earth. Some collectors have reportedly spent more money importing one than the truck itself originally cost to build. But here's the part that really makes you stop and think. All of these trucks, from the earliest World War II haulers to Cold War giants, share one thing in common. They weren't designed to be remembered. They were designed to be used until they broke. And yet, they survived. Which brings us to the forgotten truth behind military vehicles like these. Rarity isn't just about how many were built. It's about how many were allowed to live. Take a moment and picture the environments these trucks operated in. Explosions, extreme cold, heat that warped metal, fuel shortages, constant overload, no mercy. No maintenance schedules designed for longevity, and still, some of them endured. They outlasted wars. They outlasted empires. And now, decades later, they sit in museums, private collections, and remote barns. Silent witnesses to history. What makes them truly legendary isn't just their size or power, it's what they represent. Each one is a snapshot of its eras, fears, priorities, and technological limits. The British Matador reflected a nation scrambling to defend itself. The Studebaker US-6 showed how global cooperation could change the course of war. The GMC Jimmy proved that logistics win conflicts. The Scammo Pioneer and Diamond T demonstrated that brute strength could turn the tide when everything else failed. The Cold War trucks pushed engineering into extreme territory, preparing for a conflict that thankfully never fully happened. And here's something most people don't realize. Many of these trucks are actually harder to restore than tanks. Tanks get attention, tanks get funding, tanks get preserved. Trucks were seen as disposable. That means finding original parts today is incredibly difficult. Engines were swapped, frames were cut, bodies were repurposed. Authenticity is everything, and that's why collectors are willing to pay enormous sums for examples that still wear. They're original scars, original paint, original markings. Even dents matter because they tell a story. Imagine standing next to one of these machines, running your hand along steel that once rolled through war zones, hearing an engine start that hasn't run in decades, feeling the vibration of a machine that once carried the weight of history itself. That's why people collect them. Not because they're practical, not because they're comfortable, but because they connect you directly to moments that shaped the modern world. And now, as we approach the end of this journey, there's one final realization that hits hard. These trucks weren't built to be beautiful, but in their honesty, their brutality, and their purpose, they became beautiful anyway. In the final part, we're wrapping everything together. We'll look at what makes these machines timeless, why their value keeps rising, and which one truly deserves the title of the rarest and most legendary military truck of all time. And then, I want to hear from you. By now, you've traveled across decades of war, steel, and engineering, and you've probably noticed something important. These trucks weren't built with comfort in mind. They weren't meant to look good in museums or auctions. They were tools of survival. Every bolt, every gear, every slab of metal existed for one reason: to keep moving when everything else failed. And that's exactly why they matter so much today. In a world filled with digital dashboards and fragile electronics, these machines, represents something almost forgotten: absolute mechanical honesty. When one of these trucks moved, it wasn't because software allowed it. It moved because raw engineering forced it to. What truly separates legendary military trucks from ordinary ones is not size alone, it's purpose. Each of these machines was created to solve a problem that had no easy answer. How do you move artillery across mud that swallows men? How do you supply armies when roads no longer exist? How do you transport weapons so heavy that even railways can't reach them? These trucks were the answer. And in many cases, they were the only answer. That's why soldiers trusted them more than almost anything else. When a truck like this failed, missions failed, lives were at risk. So engineers overbuilt them, pushing metal, engines, and drivetrains far beyond what seemed reasonable at the time. Today, rarity isn't just about low production numbers. It's about survival against impossible odds. Many of these trucks were destroyed in combat. Others were worked to death in mines, forests, and construction sites after the wars ended. Governments sold them off cheap, stripped them for parts, or scrapped them entirely. Very few were preserved intentionally. Most survived by accident, forgotten in depots, left behind in remote regions, or saved by individuals who saw value where others saw scrap. That's why collectors don't just buy these trucks. They rescue them. And here's the part that surprises most people. The most valuable examples aren't always the cleanest or most polished. They're the most authentic, original paint, faded markings, worn seats, dents from long-forgotten journeys. These details matter because they prove the truck lived a real military life. Restoration isn't about making them new. It's about freezing them in time. That's why restoring one can take years. Finding correct engines, correct tires, correct bolts, even the sound matters. When one of these trucks starts up, collectors want it to sound exactly like it did decades ago. Loud, rough, and alive. You might be wondering which one truly deserves the title of the rarest and most legendary. The truth is, there's no single answer. The EC Matador earns its place through quiet reliability. The Studebaker US6 through global impact. The GMC Jimmy through sheer numbers and adaptability. The Scammo Pioneer and Diamond T through brute strength. The Cold War giants through engineering ambition pushed to the edge. But if rarity is measured by size, power, historical weight, and how close it came to shaping the fate of the world, the MAR 537 stands in a league of its own. Not because it's the biggest, not because it's the loudest, but because of what it carried. The weight of nuclear strategy, the tension of an entire era. Few machines in history can say that, and yet all of these trucks share one legacy. They remind us that wars aren't won by flashy machines alone. They're won by logistics, endurance, reliability, the ability to keep going when everything else stops. These trucks didn't fire shots, but without them, weapons never reached the front, troops never moved, and battles were lost before they began. That's why they deserve to be remembered. Now here's where you come in. Imagine for a moment that you could own one, just one. It doesn't have to be practical. It doesn't have to be easy to maintain. Which one would you choose? Would you take the unstoppable Soviet giant, the Cold War engineering masterpiece, or the humble World War II workhorse that helped change history quietly, 1 mile at a time? And why? That answer says a lot about how you see history, power, and engineering. If this journey surprised you, do yourself a favor and let us know in the comments which truck shocked you the most. If you enjoy stories about rare machines, forgotten engineering, and vehicles that pushed human limits, hit the like button so more people can discover these legends. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into the toughest machines ever built, because this is just the beginning. There are still countless forgotten giants out there, waiting to have their stories told. These trucks were never meant to be famous. They were meant to work, suffer, and disappear. But against all odds, they survived. And today, they stand as rolling monuments to an age when steel, fuel, and determination shaped the world. Thanks for riding along, and I'll see you in the next one.